hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is CeeLo Green, and you are now tuned in to Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, he is not famous at all. Check out this new streaming show. It is perfect. And if you don't, fuck you.
I just want you to know I practiced this word about 20 times to make sure that I did not mispronounce it.
I have a question. Has anyone ever said with all due respect and then not followed up with a zinger?
His side of the bed. If I come in and I'm on the other side, he will move it. Yeah, that's it.
Which side do you like? With all due respect, you make a good point.
Cheery Oreos! Toasted Oreos!
Mute. He's muted.
I love what he's saying. He doesn't need sounds.
You're so small, squishing your head, Joseph.
You can.
Do it with me, Joe.
With all due respect, you really do look handsome, Bruce. Cheery Oreos! Toasted Oreos!
Look at you. You are insane.
How did I do that?
You're
How did I do
insane.
that? You just made the intro reel. Yes, you did. Well, that is what everybody yearns for in their life. You know that you have arrived when you are a guest on Joseph Jaffe's Not Famous when you make the intro reel, which means you really have to step up your game. Greg Satell is in the green room right now, and he's thinking, how do I make the intro reel? What can I do? What crazy things can I do? Well, you know, Greg, you don't have to do anything but just be yourself. Greg Satell is the author of Cascades and Mapping Innovation. I love any conversation about innovation. That rhymes. I love any conversation about mapping innovation. Now, it is Monday, February 7th. It is 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which means if you look at a certain QR code appearing automagically, you'll get a bit of Jaffe coin right now. Just shine your phone on that QR code. You need to hold Jaffe coin, but you know, here's the thing. You might, when this show's run finishes, you might be a 100-air or maybe even a 1,000-air. You never know. Crypto is going up at the moment, but this is free coin that I give to you. It's my way of thanking you for tuning in live, even though just between us, don't tell anyone. It's actually Saturday afternoon at 5 p.m., which is why I'm having my glass of daddy juice. Let's call it daddy juice. Grape juice. Yes, it's grape juice. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. No, it's actually 5 o'clock here on Saturday, and we are pre-recording because, as you know by now, I teach at NYU on Mondays. But nothing changes. You get the best of Greg Satell, and you also get Gene Campbell on Tuesday, Mitch Jackson on Wednesday, and Carol Baskin on Thursday. We are going to talk about cats. We are not the musical, but the other kind of cats. So join us. We are fully booked in February, and we are now booking into March. And I'm just excited about all those conversations, as I am excited to have Matthew Sposter in the house on. I'm just loving these NFT Fridays. We are going to hear from Chibi Labs, Chibi Nation, Chibi Galaxy, and they just signed a deal with Verizon. First time I think we're seeing a big brand, get involved with an existing collection. So not trying to do it themselves, not launching themselves, because that's what big brands do. They like to control the conversation as opposed to join the conversation. Someone once wrote a book called Join the Conversation. You should look it up on Amazon. I believe it was quite a good book written in 2007. I can't recall the author's name, but I do remember that it was a really, really good book. And so I recommend wholeheartedly that you see if there are any books in print, and you'll find out how to join the conversation. So that is on Friday. And by the way, I just got my first pitch. I just got my first NFT collection reach out to me and ask if I would be interested in actually having them on the show. And what I love about it is it turns out I actually own their NFT already. So I was like, hell yeah, you can come on my show, considering I already bought into your project and I already like what you're doing. So watch the space. The best is yet to come. In addition, of course, to being able to get a bit of Jaffe coin on a daily basis, I'm also using my Discord server. I'm really leaning into the Discord server to start an after show. Now, there will not be an after show today because, as you know, I'm teaching. But Greg, you can come back anytime you want and join me in Discord. So normally you can actually just go to join the Discord in advance because there are a couple of steps you have to go through. But once you're in bit.ly/notfamous Discord, and you can actually connect with my guest, connect with me, connect with each other, and keep the conversation going. Of course, if you also subscribe to this show, the show's channel on YouTube, you're able to not only participate, but actually I'm giving away an NFT every single week. So there are other ways to be able to participate, other ways to be able to get something back. I am trying to reinvent the talk show in the streaming era. And you know what? With your help, I might just succeed. Also, finally, just to remind you that if you prefer me in audio, and who wouldn't? I mean, I've said this to, like, when I stare at myself in the mirror in the morning, there's only so much I can take. So if you'd prefer to listen versus view, well, you can just go and search for Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous on all major podcasting platforms, except maybe for Spotify, because it looks like they're losing sponsors by the truckload at the moment. So search for the right Joe, not the wrong Joe, just a little bit of Joe humor for you on a Monday afternoon. Well, now it's time for our seated soliloquy. I'm feeling very perky today. And, the seated soliloquy is always inspired by my guest. This is inspired by Greg Satell. And I call it From Moments to Movements, because movement is something that he focuses a lot on, specializes in. And of course, we will continue the conversation with him shortly. The Women's March, which in many respects ushered in a new era in business, in culture, in civility, was really heralded everything about the Me Too movement, everything about this idea of finally taking one's place on an equal footing, being able to take the conversation of representation, of equal pay, of fair pay. It was typified in the Women's March. And I remember hearing on one of the talk shows this question where one of the pundits asked, time will tell whether this is a moment or a movement. Now, what's the difference between a moment and a movement? Well, a moment is fleeting. A moment is a moment in time. It is static. It is isolated. It is disconnected. It's the fireworks display. It's the Super Bowl ad for the most part. But a movement, like the word suggests, is not static. It is dynamic. It is in motion. It is a journey, not a destination. A movement transcends a moment, 1,000 moments, 1,000,000 moments. A movement is a connection of moments that not only moves, progresses, moves forward, but actually gains a third M, which is momentum. Growth, evolution, stature, transcendence, and another word that I know Greg talks about a lot, which is transformation. From the chrysalis to a butterfly, the ability to change irrevocably, to change in order to survive. my favorite quote, one of mine, is Charles Darwin's. It is not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but rather the one that is the most adaptable to change. So right now, in my marketing space, in the advertising world, one of the ideas that I probably wrote in Join the Conversation is we need to move from campaigns to commitments. And I've since evolved that saying, because a commitment can get bigger and better. A commitment can be an ecosystem. A commitment can be a movement. The campaign is the moment. The commitment and what comes after the commitment is a movement. And I'm not going to let the cat out the bag, because there is one other word that I have not mentioned, which I'm sure Greg will. And you know what? I think it's time to bring him onto the show. Well, I hope you enjoy that, because we are, of course, pre-taping. We don't have our live studio audience, but we do have the ability to bring in applause. Well, thank you very much. Wait. Are you applauding for the soliloquy, or are you applauding because Greg Satell is coming onto the set? No matter, it doesn't matter. We'll both take it as a compliment. Greg Satell is a transformation and a change expert. He's an international keynote speaker, and he is the best-selling author of Cascades, How to Create a Movement That Drives Transformational Change. His previous effort, I like the way he calls his last book an effort. I'm sure it's much more than that. Mapping Innovation was selected as one of the best business books of 2017. It is a book that I have heard of, so I would say good effort. You get an A for effort, Greg. Greg regularly contributes to Harvard Business Review and has been featured in other A-list publications such as Barron's, Forbes, Fast Company. He's consistently ranked as one of the top 5 of the top 40 innovation bloggers in the world. I've been consistently ranked 41 in that list, and was named by IDG as one of 10 digital transformation influencers to follow today. I would not want to follow him. Luckily, I don't have to. He can be just next to me on my show. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Joseph.
And funnily enough, all this began in a room in Clubhouse with me sending you a message saying, hey, why haven't you come on my show yet? Do you want to come on my show? And you're like, who is this? How did you get my number?
No, I've seen you did some when I first got on Clubhouse, you did some great rooms with Mitch Joel.
I did.
Yes. So I have been more than aware of you and for some time, and I was really excited when you reached out. So thank you for having me.
You are welcome. And look, we'll probably chat a little bit, because you were asking me when we were like emailing and texting about my Clubhouse experience. You may be officially bringing me out of retirement, and we'll get to that right at the end. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but we'll get back to that soon. But first of all, I wanted to mention that it is actually today, meaning Monday, is Wave All Your Fingers at Your Neighbor's Day. Now, I wasn't really sure what that meant, but I did have an incident today when I walked my dog where I wanted to celebrate Wave All Your Fingers at Your Neighbor's Day, but I just wanted to wave one finger in particular, specifically the middle finger. And this is actually this is a photo that I took today, where I parked my car, same place every day, and I walk my dog around. It's like 2/3 of a mile. I have a Morkie, and we drive away from our house because the road we live on is fairly busy, and he doesn't do well with cars, and there's nowhere to walk. There's no sidewalk. So I just drive around the block, and then we find a nice little loop. So I park and I see a car reversing out of the driveway that you see by the house. And it just sits there behind me. And I kind of know what's coming, but I kind of play dumb. And eventually I get out the car and he kind of pulls up next to me. I think he's there with his wife. He rolls his window down and he says those two fateful words, not two fateful words, the fateful phrase, "Can I help you?" Now, already it's like, don't say that to me. Can I help you? So I said, no, it's fine. I'm just taking my dog for a walk. And then he said to me, and was there a reason in particular you felt the need to park right outside my house? Now, what you see behind me, Greg, is open land. I'm fairly certain he doesn't own the house behind the car and that plot. And even if he did, I don't know what the ordinance is with respect to the fact that the road, the public road, the town road in front of a house, a McMansion or whatever, belongs to that person. And I started talking to him, like raising my voice a little bit. And then, of course, he rolled his window up and he drove away, refusing to have a conversation. And, I just thought I would ask you today as my guest in this particular case, not about waving 5 fingers, not about waving one finger. Oh, no, wait, that wasn't the finger. Why do you think people are still such assholes, coming out of this period of time where there's been so much difficulty and hardship and struggle, and you don't know what the next person has been through health-wise, what their mental health state is. Why do you think people still act like that?
I think it's a breakdown in community. We used to have, smaller yards and you knew your neighbors. And I think that people just with careers and people moving in and out of places, I don't think we know our neighbors the way that we used to. And from what you're saying, it sort of seems like you said you just drove around the corner, but this man was your neighbor, I think, and obviously you didn't know each other. So for him, you were a stranger, and well, you were strangers to each other, I guess. And I think that's it's a bit sad. I know.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know my neighbors nearly as well as I'd like to. And we, in my case, I was overseas for 15 years. And so when I came back, I didn't know anybody. And the people I did know had long forgotten me. And I ended up back in my hometown, but I was away from my hometown for 20 years. But I think a lot of people kind of have that experience of living among strangers. And it's we got to figure out how to do something about that, because we're much more familiar with people online. As we were talking, you asked me why I liked Clubhouse, and one of the things I said is it's a great way to walk my dog. And I have dog walk rooms, and I'm lucky that we have about 100-acre dog park about half a mile from me. So we go there every day and we can walk for hours there if we want to. But I just throw on Clubhouse and I put in dog walk, and usually within a few minutes I have sometimes there's like 25 people in the room, and often experts on all different subjects. For instance, this one guy is living in Burkina Faso, which you might know there was recently a coup. So every day in the dog walk room, we would get like an update on the coup in Burkina Faso from a guy who's actually living there. So I think it's really interesting where the online world has become familiar with people far and away, but our neighborhoods have become full of strangers, I think.
Oh, there's so many interesting points there. But first of all, I love the fact that, whether it's news, or your daily dog walk room opens up with, and And before we get started, here's an update on how the coup is going. So it's something like really, it's kind of, we call it coup corner. But there were two things that I found really interesting with what you said, is how people have broken down the fences between them in and through social audio, but also through digital, and now in the metaverse, the ability to almost lean into empathy and taking the time to get to know one another. But the other point, which is interesting, is that I got to a point where I found the main benefit of Clubhouse was listening, not talking, because too many people talk for the sake of talking and love hearing the sound of their own voice. You are a bold exception, which is why I ended up reaching out to you in the room and saying, please come on the show. I would love you to come on the show. But I started also listening to Clubhouse when I was walking my dog. In fact, now it's been replaced listening to going back to podcasts again, which is quite funny. But there's an extra bit of context. You could listen to any room or any podcast, but you're listening to a room, you're in a room with other people walking their dog. So there's like an even added, there may not be added context, but there's added affinity, because you're all in the same place and the same time, in the same mindset. And I think that can only make for a different dynamic, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. Most people, I don't think, are actually walking their dogs. And we hardly ever talk about dogs in the dog walk room. But I think and I think it's funny about Clubhouse, because so many people have come on and been disappointed. And I'm not really sure whether it's Clubhouse or their expectations. I know it took us a while to actually learn what Clubhouse was. In the beginning, we were trying to use it for amplification. So if I'd write something in Harvard Business Review, or I'd promote my book or something I wrote, and we learned it wasn't very good for that. But it's excellent for that. Clubhouse is really about validating others in the room. And I think one of the things I've really learned, very much to your point, is how to be a better listener, and how much better conversations you can have when you're making the other people feel validated. And when people come up on stage and you validate them, they're better able to express themselves. And that sort of idea, the experience design of designing different conversations, I think has really been a fascinating journey.
I think that's absolutely spot on. And, you know, I was smiling when you said that, because the whole name and the positioning of the show, Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous, is specifically because my next guest is that the show is about my guest, not about me. And it's all about validating them. So it's so funny that you said that, because that's exactly what I've taken and tried to pour into this show. It's very rare that I will mention speaking, or I don't care. I don't even want to do it anymore. I'm probably never even going to write another book. I'm all in on this talk show, but I'm really all in on my audience, on the community that we are building, and my guests. It's why I started a section called Fun Facts, to find out more about my guests. And I was thinking, you know, it is such a pity, missed opportunity, because had, you know, my arsehole of a neighbor given me a little bit more time, I know exactly how I would have diffused the situation. I would have just offered him some egg salad, because egg salad clearly can cure all the ills of the world. It turns out, who knew that you are just a lover of egg salad, and you
I'm a
want to
big
share
egg
it,
salad fan.
and you want to share it with the world. So tell us more.
I think that egg salad often takes a back seat to tuna salad and chicken salad. And I don't think it should. I don't think that's right.
It gets a bad rap, is what you're saying.
I think it gets a bad rap.
Is it because it's a little more stinkier, or do we know?
I don't know. I don't know why people why it's not as popular. I think egg salad's wonderful.
Well, I think egg salad is wonderful, and maybe had you had more egg salad handy, you might not have done this incredible damage, which is you ruined a famous Polish film director's career. Now, I could not think of which famous Polish film director's career you ruined, and so we're just going to have to go with this one.
No. His name was Paszczykowski, and it's a little bit of a joke, but it's kind of a long story. He wanted me to be in one of his movies, and it was when I was living in Poland. It was this strange thing where a friend of his I knew hung out at the same bar in the old town that I did. And he needed some American extras for this movie he was doing. So I rounded up a bunch of friends to go do a screen test. And then they asked me, well, do you want to do it? And I said, sure, why not? And apparently he took one look at me and he said, I can still remember the phrase in Polish, but I get a call one day from, and it was this guy. I'd only been in the country maybe 6 months at the time. I forget how long, but my Polish wasn't that great. And this guy was called me with using lots of slang and everything. And I couldn't quite understand him, but it had something to do with the CIA. I mean, like crazy stuff in the army and all this. So I handed it to my friend, and she's on the phone, and and she's just going, like, her jaw is dropping. She's like, Greg, the most famous Polish director needs your help. And apparently he was very taken. He thought I had the perfect American face, and he wanted very much to be in this movie, but there was like a couple of months of shooting in Tunisia, and I was starting a new job and I couldn't do it. And actually the movie was horrible and ruined his career. So this guy had led like a charmed life. He was like the Polish Quentin Tarantino until he came across me and my American face, and that ruined his career.
It's so funny because in the book of what I call bad Photoshop, your face is on Quentin Tarantino's face. By the way, you've been.
That's pretty funny.
Maybe I should have superimposed you on the other guy. But that's, look, I've decided to rename you. You're now Greg Satell, author of Cascades and Mapping Innovation, and Man with the Perfect American Face. So there you go.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
What a story. I can say, I can pride myself on saying Jeszcze Polskie nie zimieła, which apparently is the first line of the national anthem. Or I could be completely wrong. Or maybe, and based on the look on your face, you're like, I'm pretty sure that's not even Polish.
Is really very difficult to pronounce. So
actually, that translates loosely to, will you be in my film and come to Tunisia with me? Now, did you ever have Slivovitz while you were there?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. I mean, it's rotten stuff, I have to say, but I think you can get good Slivovitz, like Johnny Walker, red, black, blue.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
lots of drinking going on in Poland.
Enough about Poland. Let's talk about this book. I think this book is maybe, without exaggerating, I would say this book is a seminal book. Mapping Innovation, a playbook for navigating a disruptive age. Now, the only problem, of course, is there's nothing disruptive about the times we're living in. So, obviously timing is everything, right, Greg? But talk a little bit about how does one even put together a playbook when the rules keep on changing, when the goalpost keeps shifting, when just when you think it's safe to go back in the water, something else comes along, whether it's, as I said, we try and plan, right? We forecast, we project, we come up with scenario planning. Nobody could have anticipated what would happen at the beginning of 2020. So how do you go about creating order from a world where the only constant is chaos?
Well, I think you have to focus on preparing rather than adapting. If you're adapting, almost by definition, you're losing, right? I mean, nobody. And even when you look at, the Googles, the Apples of the world, when they adapt, they never do it very well. I mean, look at Google's forays into social media. They just could never get it right. Anytime Apple sort of moved in to a space that was populated, they didn't do very well. Remember, they had ads and they had all of these kind of, people forget, but Steve Jobs made a lot of bad bets. For a while, you remember all of the tech companies, for some reason, wanted to disintermediate the advertising business until they I guess they eventually realized that the advertising agencies weren't making any money, and there was nothing there for them.
Yeah.
I mean, for an industry with like 30 plus margins trying to disintermediate an industry with like 10% margins, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the idea behind mapping innovation, and the reason I wrote the book, is for years of running organizations, there was always so much pressure to innovate, but I never had a good idea of how to go about it. And whenever you tried to figure out how to innovate, everybody had a different idea. So, you hear everybody talking about, let's say, design thinking, and everybody says, well, Steve Jobs loves it, and IDEO has built this wonderful practice around it, and Stanford has created an entire school around it. And so you say, wow, that seems really great. And then you look and it says, well, you should focus on the users and what they want instead of the features. And then you want to, work back to, and rapidly prototype and iterate towards a radically better solution. And that sounds great until you read, Clayton Christensen and, Innovator's Dilemma and Disruptive Innovation. And he says, well, that's how you go out of business when you're paying too much attention to your customers and the basis of competition changes. And you say, well, those two things can't be right. And they can't both be right. And, you look at someone like the Apple CEO, Tim Cook. He said, well, you should never have an innovation lab or an innovation division. And then you look at Google, which has a massive innovation division. So I sort of set out to figure out, kind of straighten out this confused jumble of, everybody seems to have a different idea about innovation, and how are we supposed to think about that? And basically what I came up with is that innovation is really about solving problems. And there is many different ways to innovate as there are as many types of problems to solve. So mapping innovation was really about classifying problems in order to match them with strategies best fit to solve them. And it really turned out quite well, and people seem to find it really, really super helpful. So that's something I'm really proud of.
I really love that point. I mean, there's so much that you've already mapped out, right? From the idea of preparing versus adapting this idea of classifying problems. I've heard that a lot. I believe in it. It is key. That is the actual textbook definition of innovation, which is unique, original approaches that solve problems, that have a productive, tangible outcome. And so there were two things that I wanted to follow up on. The first was, I think the thing about Google, they're kind of, comments, but also kind of questions back to you. So the first is, the thing about Google is, with the Innovation Lab, is that it is a commitment. It is the movement versus the moment for them. Their 10% days, their engineers have to spend 10% of their time doing things that have nothing to do with their job. The classic now, new, next. So when you make a company-wide commitment to innovation, it isn't just about, and I've seen enough of these innovation labs at big brands and agencies, which is all, that's where the VR, that's where the Oculus and the VR goggles lie. It's like candy. It's just the place where people come and they all look at all the the gadgets and the gizmos, but nobody has any intent on doing anything with them. So that was the one point. The second point,
I think it's an interesting point about innovation labs. People misunderstand innovation labs. Innovation labs tend not to be very good at solving problems.
Right.
They tend to be much better at finding problems for existing solutions. And in the book, I feature Data Labs at Experian, which does a wonderful job at that. And they what Data Labs is tasked with is going to customers and finding out what problems they have and solving them. And then when it's ready to, and then they co-create the solution with the customer. And then when it's ready to be scaled up into a business, it gets sent over to an operational division. So they can be successful. I think all too often, very much like you say, that's where they put the foosball and the VR goggles and the, rather than a place where we say, okay, we have these existing solutions. Now, where can we find new problems for those solutions to solve?
I really love that build, and thank you for adding to it. The second point was, I was thinking about Apple, and I kind of think I have an answer for it, but I want to hear your answer first, which is the iAds and I mean, there's so many amazing points. Like Google as well, by the way, has failed countless times, but their victories are so stupendously awesome. Android, Gmail, YouTube, that some they buy, some they build, some they outsource, some they partner. But one thing where Apple got into a business that wasn't theirs, that they might have seemed to be adapting to, was this. And I was wrong. I remember saying, what the hell is Apple doing getting involved in the phone business? I was dead wrong on the iPhone, and I'm not embarrassed to admit it. Clearly, that isn't adapting, because if it was, they wouldn't have won. So I have a theory in terms of why it worked and why why the phone was not an example of adapting. What would your thoughts be in terms of why iAds didn't work, but iPhone did?
Yeah, they didn't know anything about the ad business. I mean, they really reinvented phones. One of the interesting things about the iPhone is most people don't realize, but a big part of the success was how they negotiated with remember, they only offered iPhones to one carrier, and they completely switched the relationship there, where the carrier couldn't screw with the operating system. But I think we never talk about Google adapting to the search engine or Apple adapting to the mobile internet. I think when you're really focused on creating, and what I think, and you know, Steve Jobs is such a great example of this. He never did. He never did. There was one instance where he did market research. I think it was with the stores, but generally he looked for something he thought sucked. So, you know, computers sucked. So he built the Macintosh. The you know, it was always about some problem that he was really passionate about. And for Steve Jobs, it was, you know, he felt so passionately that phones sucked and that music players sucked. So he had a very, very clear idea in mind of the problem he was trying to solve. And I think that's what makes the difference. I know in our transformation work, in the first thing we do is we sit down with the client and say, okay, what's the vision of, you know, what's the vision, right? Every change starts with a grievance, and you need to transform that grievance into a vision. And very often, you know, they have a grievance, they have a problem, there's something they don't like, but they don't know what the vision is. But just as often, and usually it has something to do with innovation, whether it's an innovation lab or something like design thinking or agile or whatever it is, they come and they have a clear vision, but they haven't identified the grievance. So they say, hey, you know, we want to switch on everybody to agile or everybody to user-centered design or whatever it is. And people don't have a good sense of the problem, and it just doesn't feel relevant. And I think I spend a lot of time with people with innovation in their titles, and you see, you know, when people see someone with an innovation in their title coming, they like run the other way a lot of the time,
right?
Because there's a perception this is a person with a solution to a problem either I don't have or I don't think is important, and I've got other things to do.
So my theory, by the way, or at least my build was, and we know that Google, for example, was not the first search engine. It was, I think, number 30 or 32. Right. So being first is not necessarily the answer. Being best, maybe. But I just think my theory was just being all in. If you're going to do it properly. Don't limp in. You know, you can't be half pregnant, as the saying goes. And I think what Google did with search, what Apple did with the phone, they went all in. I mean, so much so that the iPhone, you know, Apple dropped the name computer from their title, not long afterwards. So they went all in and they did it properly. They did it properly. They saw something that sucked, and they provided a solution to the suckage, and then they became best in class. And it's funny, Greg, because I always find a quote for my guest, and you've just created the most amazing bridge between our two worlds, because this was the quote that I found for you. And it reads, civilization is a movement and not a condition, a voyage and not a harbor. And so there were many aspects. This is Arnold Toynbee who said this.
Yes, the historian. I love that. You know, it's interesting. One of the things I found in my research is that the victory phase is often the most dangerous phase, because we get that first victory and we think it'll be over after that, right? Everybody will see that we were right and they were wrong, and the opponents of this change will just, you know, will sort of wither away and, you know, admit defeat. And the point at which I really got interested in movements I found myself in the middle of one. In 2004, I was running a major news organization in Ukraine during the Orange Revolution.
Wow.
And writing Cascades, and I started actually working on Cascades before mapping innovation. It took me 15 years just to figure out what had happened. And we didn't understand that it was going to be a journey. We thought, hey, they tried to falsify an election. We went to the streets. We got the result overturned. Justice was done. We could all go home now. And clearly that didn't turn out very well because to make a long story short, there had to be another revolution almost 10 years later, which was far bloodier, but they seem to have gotten some things right where we had them wrong.
So we're going to talk. I mean, I've been flashing up. If people are trying to wondering why are there numbers? Why 1 and why 6? Because you beautifully spoke to what you call 6 principles for creating transformational change, and I pulled out 4 of them of the 6. So I don't want to, I want to give people an incentive to buy the book. But one of them was identify a keystone change. It starts with a grievance. My interpretation on that, I love, I always say to startup founders, which is what was the pain? What was the curiosity? What was the frustration? Why did you start this company? It's not good enough just to say, oh, because I wanted to be a billionaire or because I had a vision. No, it has to come from that seeing things as they are and asking why, or seeing things as they could be and asking why not. Another one was survive victory. And what I loved about, I didn't understand what this meant, but now I understand. It is winning the election. It is, it is defeating your opponent. And it is actually, quite frankly, even why the business world messes up, because everything is about acquisition. And the moment you make the purchase, everybody just forgets about that consumer, and they go back to the next purchase and the next conversion, instead of really being able to say, our job is just beginning when somebody makes the purchase. The whole point about advocacy and retention.
If I can tell you a great story about surviving victory. So all of this I learned from my friend Sir Jaffe, who is probably the world's most successful revolutionary. He helped lead the movement to overthrow Milosevic in Serbia, and then he trained activists in the Rose Revolution, in the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and since has trained activists in more than 50 countries. So wherever you see one of these uprisings, whether it was the Arab Spring or in Zimbabwe or Myanmar or whatever, he trained activists there. And he told me this concept of survive victory comes from him. And in Serbia, and it's very much to your point about the election, after they threw Milosevic out and got the got the democratic government in, his organization, it was called Otpor. Now he's the executive director of something called Canvas, the Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies. But the organization that led the overthrow of Milosevic was called Otpor, which means resist in Serbian. And the day they went into office, the new government, his organization put up billboards all over Belgrade. Now we're watching you. And it was very much to the point of shared values. We didn't put you in office so that you could rule, so that you can be in charge. We put you in office for you to commit to shared values. And, Serbia is certainly not a perfect place today, but I mean, really a huge difference from. I mean, it is a democratic place, and something else Sir Jaffe told me, which I always loved. He said, "The goal of every revolution is to become mundane and ordinary. If you're successful, it should be hard to explain what was won because the previous order seems so unthinkable."
Say that one more time for people watching and for me.
I'm trying to remember it word for word, but it was something along that. It was the goal of a revolution should be to become mundane and ordinary. If you're successful, it should be hard to explain what was won because the previous order has become so unthinkable.
So it's an interesting, I think one of my interpretations of that is that we always talk about, so I'll take Web3 as an example, or we could even talk about social audio. We always talk about the what comes next, the new, as being so revolutionary, right? But the reality is, if we talk about conscious capitalism, let's just talk about that actually, conscious capitalism, this idea of not socialism, but this idea of we is greater than me. That might sound revolutionary, but this idea
that was Adam Smith's original idea. This idea of shareholder capitalism didn't exist really before 1970. And when Milton Friedman first talked about that, when he first wrote that op-ed in the New York Times, people thought he was crazy. It was considered extreme, and I think that's a great it's a great, almost a counterexample, because now those ideas which seemed heretical in the 1970s, that's what everybody thinks capitalism is. It's, they don't really think of it as
as barbaric, as inhuman, as immoral. He has another one less grandiose, but then I want to go back to the big revolutionary idea. I teach, as I've been saying it. In fact, I'm probably teaching this right now, which is, we were told, you and I are probably of similar age, which is like what, 35 to 40, that we were brought up where our parents told us never get into a car with a stranger, and today they call it UberX.
Yes.
Today that revolutionary idea is so mundane, certainly to our kids in the next generation, this idea of just getting into a car with a stranger, but so much so that what became before that is considered to be heretical, barbaric, gas, traffic, emissions, this idea of driving one person at a time instead of being able to, put more cars on the road instead of less. That might be more of certainly a less altruistic example, but one that I think feeds into that quote.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. Or try and explain to your child, what life was like before the internet. Or, remember we used to have to write down directions.
I remember. Or we had a map book that was always filled with coffee stains and
yeah.
Right now, we've just probably lost 80% of our audience. They're like, what? What is that? Next, you'll be telling us phones used to have coils going into walls. But the book, when you talk about Cascades, there's another C word, and I spoke about a few C words in my soliloquy. Cascades is another one. I spoke about campaigns, and I spoke commitments, and we spoke about change. But the final C word is culture. And I figured that's got to be inside the heart of this idea of how to create a movement that drives transformational change. Because it's interesting when we talk about matches and flames, if you want to keep the flame flying, if you want to keep the flame growing, if you want to nurture that flame and grow that flame, there's got to be a long-term goal. So I wonder if you would talk to the role that culture plays in all of this.
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of the things that we say all the time is that you should start with a majority. What we do, the best indication of what we do and what we think are what the people around us do and think. And the reason the book's called Cascades is that in my in my sort of quest to figure out what happened, what I had been a part of, because I really hadn't understand it. I later found out that there was a whole science behind how cascades happen. And a huge part of it is that majorities don't just rule, they also influence. And when you can get, and you can always expand a majority out, but as soon as you're in the minority, you'll feel like immediate pushback. And very much to your point about culture, density, I think, is one of the least appreciated aspects. If you can start in a small place where you have a majority and build up density, you can always build that out. If you try and go far and wide, it tends not to do as well because you don't have that culture. It's easy to create culture when everybody has a shared values, shared identities. If you're, even if that majority is 3 people in a room of 5, you can work with that. Facebook is a great example of how they started on college campuses, and then, went from campus to campus. So they were able to build up density where like everybody on the campus would be on Facebook. And that's what we would call a saturated cluster. And what's interesting and the sort of mantra of the book is small groups, loosely connected, united by a shared purpose. And that's basically shorthand for how the science works. You get clusters to supersaturate, and then the links between those clusters will help others make their threshold, and that's how you get that cascading effect. And I think a great example is of how it works is a wave at a stadium, right? So people come in small groups, and then they become loosely connected. And when they when they get to share a purpose, you see that wave at a stadium. It looks like one organism, but it really is a bunch of a lot of small groups sitting next to each other that become linked in that way.
And we hit number 3, which is build a network of small groups. And earlier anyway, you spoke about values, indoctrinate genomes of values. So we hit them all. I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I hinted earlier that you might be bringing me out of retirement because amidst everything, you very kindly invited me. You can see where I am. I'm the Zipsy supernormal on 3 or 2 from the right. I now live in a Web3 avatar-enabled world where I've actually become very, very comfortable identifying with all avatars, in particular female avatars, because I've been supporting a lot of female-run and female-led projects. So that's me, and we are going to be, in fact, the same time next week, I'm going to be your guest, I suppose. Skills for the next era, become a great storyteller. So you're bringing me back into the fold. Will it be a moment or will it be a movement? That's the question, right, Greg?
Well, we're hoping it's going to be a movement, because once Joseph Jaffe comes back, then everybody will follow him back. and it will be a movement.
Joseph Jaffe, though, the same Joseph Jaffe who is decidedly not famous. But just to remind you that that we've had the very famous Greg Satell, and it's what an absolute joy to have you. Tomorrow, Gene Campbell will be in the house, and I've been picking up on his story. It's an amazing story. He's out playing basketball, but he's not an NBA superstar. He's struggled and he's combated and countered much adversity, and he's out playing in the nondescript leagues in Europe. And his message is, you don't have to be LeBron James to be a star and to have self-worth and to be able to make it. So that is tomorrow. Greg, I will see you in the club. I'm going to look out for you this week. I don't know whether that means I'll be lurking or loitering, but thank you for joining me today. This has been Greg Satell, author of Cascades and Mapping Innovation, and of course, man with the perfect American face. You can follow him in Clubhouse. He really does run unbelievable rooms. He had one last week when I actually, or a couple weeks ago when I reached out to him, that had some of the smartest minds in the world on that stage. You can also follow him on Twitter. Please go and buy Cascades, How to Create a Movement That Drives Transformational Change. And if you want to connect with him, you can do that at gregsatell.com or check out his blog at digitaltonto.com. I enjoyed this conversation, and of course, we all know who else enjoyed it. It's Chuck Norris.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. It was a real pleasure.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.